Well, welcome, and here we go. We are into the Tuesday edition of the Writ Race, well into week 3 now, and as we watch the campaign unfold across the country. John Wright here, I'm Dave Trafford, happy to welcome in Bob Richardson is here, a long time, involved with the Liberal Party, Liberal campaigns, the war rooms, etc. Bob, great of you to join us. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Dave.
So, with your perspective, and Amanda Galbraith was on with us last week, and she kind of has that same kind of perspective on from the inside looking out, outside looking in, war rooms, campaigns, etc. Just give me your, 60 seconds on what you think this campaign looks like relative to all the other ones that you've worked on.
Well, it's been a rough, bumpy start for the Liberals. I would be lying to say that they think that they've had a terrific run for the last 2 weeks. They've had a bit of a rough go. That being said, I do think it is still relatively early in this campaign. I think a lot of Canadians haven't checked in, which is probably good for them. Doesn't necessarily mean that they can win because of that, but I think that's probably helpful. And they seem to have bottomed out in the last 3, 4 or 5 days and seem to be competitive again with the Conservatives. So I think if there was a big slide going on, it seemed to have been paused. We'll wait and see where that heads from there. But at this point, I think there's a lot of sound, a lot of fury. I'm not sure there's a lot of fire yet.
Well, but to be fair, this is the government that called the election. So, out of all of them,
question
that they should have been ready for this. And I would think that the advice going in would have been to been far better prepared or appear to be prepared with, some kind of ballot question framing as opposed to looking in the rearview mirror.
No question. I thought their ballot framing on day one was weak. And quite frankly, so far, their principal opponent has been themselves. They've stepped on their message 3 or 4 different times. They've had, the tour. They were kind of rerunning their 2019 and 2015 tours in 2021. When you've been in government for 6 years, it's a different kettle of fish. And I think they're finding that out on the road. I think they corrected it, as we could see this week. And their tour seems better, certainly in Granby and Canada today and in other places. So I think in Nunavut yesterday too as well. So I think all 3 of those days were good, or events were good, but they need to score a lot more good events if they're going to get back into this in a major way and form another government. So
I want John to weigh in here on some of the ideas, the evolving attitudes that we're hearing and seeing in some of the polling numbers that popped up. And there's been a few in the last couple of days. But we left off yesterday in yesterday's episode, and, John suggesting that in the absence of an obvious ballot question, that others are being developed. Afghanistan is a ballot question. John yesterday suggesting that the Prime Minister himself has become a ballot question here.
Well, I think Trudeau's always been a ballot question. He was a ballot question in 2015. He was a ballot question in 2019, and there's no question he's a ballot question this time. His job, if he's smart, is to frame it and say, there are 2 people who could be Prime Minister, me or Aaron O'Toole. I stand for this on healthcare, this on housing, this on seniors, this on the environment, this on gun control. The other guys over here, you guys pick who you want. If he does that in a clear, convincing way, I think, in the balance of the campaign, he has a good chance of still being the Prime Minister of the country. But they have to develop a better narrative than they have to this point. It's been sort of a series of government announcements, if I can call it that. They need to be better knitted together. There needs to be a more cohesive ballot question and a more cohesive narrative. If they can do that, I think they stand a good chance of being reelected.
But, John, even to the point you were making earlier in the series, is that affordability was up there at the top of the list. It took a while for the Liberal campaign to catch up with that. But, even today, Mr. Singh is out there ringing that bell.
Yeah, he is, and he's talking about taxes and, it's all pocketbook and money stuff. I reached a point today, probably about midday, when I saw the polls that have been released today, and there's still a couple more to come, where Bob's right. I mean, the slide seems to have stopped. I mean, we're back to kind of where we were at the beginning of the campaign, but a little more support for the Conservatives. So not much more. Yeah. It's there. But I started to think about it because Dave Agar, who used to be at CFRB, Newstalk 1010, put out an interesting tweet, and he said that he'd got in the mail his ballot from Elections Canada, and rather than having the slate to actually tick off the name and then put it in the envelope and send it back, it actually is a write-in ballot. You have to actually do some work to go and find out who the candidate is and then to write the name in. And I don't know whether someone's going to be able to read the name. There could be a lot of spoiled ballots, but you have to do some work. And so, if they were talking about a lot of people, voting that way, that could be a problem. Number two was just getting the vote out. I mean, we're seeing kind of an artificial skating rink here, aren't we? I mean, we're polling and we're talking about people and their attitudes as if they were voters to go to the polls. But the more I'm starting to see some of these things, the more I sort of think that, if we have in the middle of September in Ontario the rise of the Delta variant, and we've got kids, at school, off school and at home, if we've got elderly people who feel that they don't want to go out and expose themselves to a polling booth, even though it might be even in their own place. I mean, there's a number of dynamics at play here in getting the vote out for each party that we might not even know in certain ridings, given that people are putting in their ballots by mail. It could be counted over a couple of days. Like we're used to seeing at least, those cliffhangers at 2 o'clock in the morning, the CBC or CTV or Global declaring at least somebody. We may not see that. So I'm curious, Bob, this is unlike any other campaign, granted that, but getting the vote out is going to be very interesting this time. Just to leave it with this, you and I would have ordered buses to go and get those people and take them to the polling booths and bring them back. I don't think you're going to do that this time. It's going to be a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, it is, and it's interesting. I am told that there are only about 250 to 300,000 Canadians have requested ballots at this point, mail-in ballots, of which they've only received 10% back. So that's around 25 to 30,000. They were expecting between 2 and 3 million. So I'm not sure Canadians are exercising that quite in the way that Americans have. So that will be an interesting part of the dynamic. So far, from the looks of things and having chatted to some campaigns, people are planning to vote in the advance polls, or people are planning to vote on election day. So it looks pretty traditional to date. I'm not sure there's going to be as much uptake on early voting as there should be. There is one voting disgrace that should not be going on, and Elections Canada should fix that. Is no polling stations on university and college campuses. I think that is completely unacceptable. There is no reason why in this day and age we couldn't have polling stations on university and college campuses. They're saying, we couldn't get enough workers. Last time I checked, I believe we have 60,000 public servants coast to coast to coast. I'm sure we could find some people to run polling stations at university and college campuses. So we're going to have, I think, we're making it difficult for younger voters. Voters are not taking up the mail-in option, at least to this point. So I think it's going to be fairly traditional. But again, I could be wrong, but so far that seems to be where it's headed.
Yeah, and I don't want to take up a lot of time on this, but to your point, those young people have tended to be more of the Liberal cohort who have voted. They kind of helped in 2015 sweep Justin Trudeau in. So, you know what? To your advantage, or to the Liberal advantage of having those booths there, you would then get a lot more votes from that crowd. But if they're not there, the question is, do they actually show up and vote at the poll? So again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but this is a complication that I would think that if you're sitting like you have in a campaign, you've got a crew of people trying to figure this out, hopefully a while ago, but trying to figure out the tactical element to get those people out.
Well, given what we've seen on the tour and the comm so far, I'm not sure they figured it out a few months ago. I think this might be a little on the fly.
Well, but again, to your point, though, both of you, I mean, you would have thought that there would have been a basic checklist. Here's how we did it before. We're not doing it like that because of these 5 reasons, COVID being one and all the issues around it. So, are they going to the Liberals going to be able to get out of their own way soon enough to make a difference? I mean, I realize that they've kind of recovered their footing to some degree in the last couple of days, Bob, but they've got ground to make up. And John's been pointing out over the last week or so, it's not that the Tories or the NDP are surging ahead with huge support. It's that the Liberal Party, the bus, it's going in reverse.
Well, I would say this. The Liberals have good bones. They've got some good bones, if I could put it this way. They've got a strong ground game, probably the best ground game in the country from coast to coast. They have got excellent candidates, and they've put a premium on candidates, much more so than other parties have. For instance, here in 416-905-55 ridings, name me the Conservative star candidate, the 3 or 4 big names that they've brought in. It's a big donut. Which surprises me. In a seat like Markham Unionville, they're running a 21 or 22-year-old, and that was the seat they held during the Harper government. Could they take all those seats on a wave? Yes, they could. But barring a wave, that's when you need the local president of the Chamber of Commerce or councillor or mayor, and they haven't seemed to have done that sort of homework. The Liberals have coast to coast. In 2015, in 2019, and in this time. So that's good. I think they've got some good, clear policies that they can run on and differentiate themselves from their opposition. And they've got a pretty decent record on the pandemic, not perfect. So if you can manage to kind of knit all that together, you do have a reasonable story to tell. I think they are weak on the why are we doing this? And there needs to be, I think, part here's why we need to do it, and part mea culpa on that one. But so I think there's a possibility for them to be able to put it together. But and I think they seem to be headed in that direction, which is good. But they got a lot of work to do.
Does Afghanistan play prominently in the last 3 weeks of this campaign?
I believe no. I believe it has at the beginning of the campaign. I think it's tough to have sustained media in the last 3 weeks on this if it's not being as broadly covered. And I think that there was a huge personal element in the front end of it that I personally found compelling. I sit on the board of War Child Canada. We are trying to get people out. I sit on the board of Canada Soccer. We are trying to get the Afghan women's soccer team out. So I think like a lot of people, you were focused on the issue. It's not going on anymore. So I think trying to sustain that as a huge issue. And also, I think there are 2 camps on that issue. There are some that are mad exclusively at the present government and think that they were slow getting people out. And then there are others that say, hang on here. This has been going on for 10 years. And by the way, we weren't exactly the only guys caught with our pants down here. There were 14 other countries and also U.S. intelligence. So I'm not so sure it's as clear-cut an issue as people think it is.
What's interesting, Bob, is that every time the Liberals seem to get some footing, they're impacted by outside circumstances. And the one thing that hasn't happened yet, but is expected to be serialized, no doubt, by some of the media, is we got a book coming. We had a book out by a former cabinet minister who was dumped from the government. And I wonder whether or not, it kind of eats up 3 or 4 days and it stomps on messages, but we may have some revelations from Jody Wilson-Raybould not too long from now.
Yeah, I think she's preaching to the converted. If you're listening to Judy Wilson-Raybould, you likely don't like Trudeau already. I'm not so sure how many people she can bring over at this point. She is pathologically opposed to this prime minister and to this government. I think the feeling is mutual, by the way. I'm not sure how many people she's going to convince. I do expect a media blitz from particularly right-wing media like the National Post and the Sun and the Rex Murphys of the world and others on this topic. But short of that, I'd put a big discount on that one. I don't think people take her that seriously anymore.
So let's just look ahead, because the next big thing on the calendar will be the debates. And to what degree, considering we don't have a platform yet, and I hear, soon come is sort of the refrain from the Liberals. Two things. Does it matter?
I am told very shortly.
Oh, that's what we. Yeah, thanks for that insight.
I think it's a very thin one. It's basically, what do you want, and here's the money.
It might be.
That's kind of it, right there.
Down to the final check in the checkbook. But to what degree does that really matter? I mean, for us, Bob, we're in the weeds on this stuff. Do people really give a rat's rectum that there isn't a platform that's published out there? One. Two is, do they focus more on preparation for this debate? Because it's not one of the things that necessarily the Prime Minister can win, but he can lose ground.
I think you're right. First, on the debate piece, it's important. And weirdly enough, one of the most important debates is this week. It's the TVA debate in Quebec. Huge audience in Quebec. It'll be important. This is how the Trudeau guys handle this will be important. The Prime Minister needs to be good and forceful. His problem is Aaron O'Toole's French, and I'm born in Quebec City and I speak French, is not bad. And in actual fact, I kind of like it. So Andrew Scheer basically didn't speak French and kind of got away with pretending to as Speaker of the House of Commons with a few lines here and there. And that showed up in the TVA debate, and that put an end to his campaign. So I don't think the Liberals are going to get that sort of a bonus that they got last time. So I think it'll be important for the Prime Minister to do a really good job in the TVA debate, and then in the subsequent two debates too as well. In terms of the platform, I don't think most Canadians give a rat's ass about the platform, to be honest, but it does feed into the narrative that they seem to be unprepared for the election that they called. And I think that's a fair criticism.
I don't want to get esoteric about Quebec, but since you're from there, and you understand the politics there, you and I and Dave have seen the Mulroney campaigns of 84 and 88. We saw, the nationalists go over to support the Conservatives. If you're looking at Quebec right now, what do you see in terms of the Bloc versus the Conservative and Liberal vote? Does it move in a particular direction?
I think it's pretty locked in, but I could be wrong on this. I think the Bloc is pretty much good for almost 30 seats or thereabouts. There's two Quebecs. There's the island of Montreal and West Quebec, and then there is kind of the rest of Quebec. The Liberals do well on the island of Montreal and West Quebec. The Bloc pretty much everywhere else. The Conservatives do well in some of the rural agricultural seats in and around Quebec City. I think Aaron O'Toole's job is to try to hold his 10 seats. I think he's had two or three or four people retired. So he's got to try to hold and win and maybe try to win a couple more. The Liberals if everything went right for them, could pick up 6 or 8 seats from the Bloc. The Bloc's ability to pick up some more seats, I think, is limited this time around. So I think Quebec is going to come out in the wash a bit where we see it today.
The one party we haven't talked about at all is the NDP. And maybe that's just because we take them for granted or they're not on the screen. But I'd be interested in getting your perspective on, the Liberals and the NDP fighting for that left vote and whether or not, how the Liberals are going to play that.
Well, even despite Mr. Trudeau's troubles in the last 2 weeks, if you look at it, he's at best in the low 20s, high teens, low 20s, depending on who you're looking at. He's competitive in 3 or 4 seats in Atlantic Canada. He's competitive in precisely 2 seats in Quebec. In 416-905, 55 seats. I am going to be hugely generous and say he is competitive in 5. I personally believe it's 2, so on and so forth. I don't think this is a serious campaign. And I say this with some respect. I like him. He seems like a nice guy. I don't think this has been a serious leader in that Ed Broadbent, Jack Layton, and Tom O'Kerr did the work recruiting candidates, putting the organization in place, doing kind of the gut work that you got to do in politics to get to a point where you can take advantage of stuff. This guy's been doing TikTok videos, and he hasn't been doing the sort of gut work that's required in politics, and I think it started to show.
So let's look down the road. I mean, we started this conversation about talking about the launch of the campaign. The purpose, presumably, of the campaign was to win the Liberals a majority, because that's what the Prime Minister said he needed to run the country effectively. At that number, the Liberals would have to pick up something like 15 seats based on the way things were when it dissolved. The way you're talking and what I'm hearing from John and his numbers, holding on to what you got might just be the best that they can hope for.
2 months before this call, I thought a majority was very difficult to get. If you take a look at the Liberal vote, it's fairly maxed in the Atlantic, fairly maxed in Quebec, fairly maxed in Ontario, could pick up a few seats across the urban parts of the prairies, maybe a few in BC. It's very tough, and a working majority isn't 15, a working majority is 25. So, to get there, I thought this was a real stretch. I still think it's a stretch. I think it's highly unlikely now. So I think a little bit like Mr. Davis in 1977 in Ontario. He got a minority in 75, went in 77. The Liberals had a new leader, and he thought he could kind of wipe the mat with them. That didn't quite work out. I think somebody's going to have to swallow hard, apologize, and get down to work after this if he's lucky enough to come back and form a government.
And for those of us that saw Mr. Davis, I mean, the phrase, all in the fullness of time, rings a bell. But I'm interested in one thing, Bob, because if there is a minority, and let's say it's a conservative opportunity minority, where does Jagmeet Singh go? I mean, he's already signaled that he might work with Aaron O'Toole. Does he get courted by both sides, and do we naturally expect him to side with the Liberals, or do you think there's a potential there for some kind of relationship?
Well, 86% of NDP voters would expect him to work to form a government with the Liberal Party. It's one thing, and I understand what he's doing from a bravado perspective, and also saying, hey, why do I need to show all my cards at this point? I'll wait until the election's over. I get that, but I think he would have cohesion problems. I think it would be difficult for a number of New Democrats to swallow backing the Conservatives on a whole variety of different issues. It kills childcare. It kills a variety of different things. This is the crowd that 62 of them voted for conversion therapy. This is the crowd that wants semi-automatic weapons. Let's just keep going through the list. If you're a New Democrat, NDP, if you're Brian Massey from Windsor, I don't think you want to go home and say, hey, we're going to back this guy, and here's the things that his party agrees with. I think they'd have a tough time doing it.
But isn't the message that the same, whether it's the Tories or the Liberals, is that the NDP positioning themselves as the one who are forcing the government to adopt what is in their agenda, to be able to say, if you're going to get my support, you're going to have to deal with this on childcare or whatever it might be. So he's not just going to throw it open and say, there it is. He would have some chips on the table to say, if and when this is what I require.
Yeah, I think he'll do something like that. He may even go for an accord like we saw between the NDP and the Liberals in 1985 in Ontario, or it could be an accord without being in government saying we've agreed to the following things for the next number of years, and they have to implement them. So it's not necessarily just by issue. So he can then go back and say, look at all the stuff I secured for you. Mm-hmm. I think he's got a couple of options there, and he'll be more in the driver's seat.
Well, I mean, to your point as to, the quality of the leadership there is one thing. I mean, being the entertainer and being the guy who's very likable is one thing, but to be able to negotiate and be that politically savvy on his own, I mean, that's one thing. Does he have the team around him to support him in that?
He has some bright, very experienced staffers. Anne McGrath comes to mind, who's been around for a long period of time. Very capable New Democrat. He's got some good people in his caucus. too as well, who could certainly help out. He doesn't have that sort of experience, I don't think, either from the provincial legislature or in the last couple of years.
Well, let's leave it there. Bob, it was great of you to join us. It's great to have your insights, and if you don't mind, we might bug you between now and the 20th of September and see how things are either roaring ahead for the Liberals or trying to find a place to hide. Either way.
Well, I would say buckle up. It'll be fun.
We'll do that. Bob Richardson joining us today on The Writ Race. I'm Dave Trafford. He's John Wright. The Writ Race is an Eye Contact podcast.